Hey everyone, it's Carter King. If you're an educator, a leader, or just a parent who wants to teach kids about space, check out my newest book, Carter's Journey Through Space. It's available now on Amazon, Target, and bookstores everywhere. Come explore the universe with me.
Welcome to another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle King, and the goal of this podcast is simple: to help you create environments where people thrive. Through real conversations, practical strategies, and powerful stories, we equip leaders, educators, and change makers just like yourself to build cultures rooted in purpose, performance, and authenticity. Because culture isn't something you talk about, it's something you live. This is the Contagious Culture Podcast. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle King, and the goal of this podcast is simple: to help you create ecosystems and environments where people thrive. Today's conversation I am especially excited about because it sits right at the heart of what so many mission-driven leaders are wrestling right now. How do we build organizations that are not only passionate, but sustainable? How can we bring in money into the conversation? And how do we move from this idea of surviving to really building and truly creating something that can last, that can thrive? And our guest today works at the intersection of law, philanthropy, wealth management, and nonprofit leadership, bringing more than 3 decades of experience helping organizations strengthen fundraising strategy, board governance, planned giving, and long-term sustainability. He has helped raise over $150 million in philanthropic support and has become a trusted voice for the Latino-led nonprofits seeking to move from grant dependency to deeper financial independence. Pedro, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Kyle.
I appreciate you so much. Before we get started, I'd love for you to talk about who you are outside of the titles, outside of the different things that we often want to, that allows us to be introduced. Who are you and what are you really fighting for?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. So I am born and raised in Puerto Rico. I'm the youngest son. I'm the youngest of 4. I come from, from 2, what we call in Puerto Rico, the son of 2 jibaros of Calle, Puerto Rico, which, there were, my dad lived in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere with no running water, no electricity. My mom was raised in more of the middle of the town the town where she was born and raised. And, I bring this sense of pride of being Puerto Rican, being Latino. I was raised with an unsurmountable amount of faith from my parents. My dad was a Korean War veteran. My dad went to college and grad school on the GI Bill, and raised 4 kids, put us through college, helped his grandkids go through college. Education was very pivotal and an emphasis in my dad's education. He was very clear that education elevates you to the next level, not only social economically, but professionally. So that educational aspect was ingrained in me from an early childhood. So for me, going to college was not a choice. It was more of where was I going to go? And through that path, he's also taught me a sense of justice through my faith and through making sure that we really, as blessed as I've been and as blessed as we are, we always, those that God gives you a lot, you should give and you should receive as well. So I think that's the nature of why I'm doing what I'm doing at this stage of my life and career.
I'd love to know, for the parents and for the people out there that are even raising young children and they want to embody that sense of service, that sense of giving back, that sense of philanthropy in a sense into their households, what are some of the things that were happening that created this condition, created this environment? Because even as a father raising 2 young ones, I recognize in my own experiences, there were things that opened up with me that helped me really lead into what I'm doing today. But I'd love to learn and just know and be exposed to what were some of the conversations or the things happening in your household that helped embody or just plant those seeds into you today.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned to you, I was raised with an unsurmountable amount of faith, and my parents were, church goings, and my parents helped fundraise for both of the parishes that were built in the neighborhood that we lived in Puerto Rico and in South Florida later in life. And, I remember as a kid, my parents being very grateful for what we had. And I remember my mom grabbing and collecting bags of clothes that we were no longer using, and she would gift them to my aunts and my aunts of my dad's side of the family that lived in the middle of nowhere, Puerto Rico, kind of like the hand-me-downs, but they were still really good clothes that she would give them. And as a matter of fact, I was in Puerto Rico not long ago, and one of my cousins reminded us, like, your mom used to be so generous and give us all these great clothes that didn't fit you guys that we were able to use. And also the other thing is, my dad was an accountant, and I remember every once in a while on Sundays, my dad would sit down and kind of reconcile his checking account, which is something for the elderly people to understand. But I remember my dad sitting down and, kind of getting a stack of envelopes, which at this point in my life, I knew what they were. They were annual appeals, end of the year appeals from Catholic Charities or the Disabled Veterans Association, or mostly anything pertaining to poor, faith, and military. My dad, that was his soft spot. And I remember him just writing checks. And my parents were those donors that wrote 10, 20 checks of $25 each and send them. And I can't even tell you, particularly with the Catholic Charities, how many plastic bead rosaries my parents had at home, that when my mom passed away, I kind of took all of them and said, I can't throw these away. So I think that sense of giving and seeing my parents being philanthropic, but also the sense of being so blessed that we have, so we give, and the joyness that I saw in my parents writing those checks. And, like I always say to people, even though they were not, big checks, they were small checks that had a big impact, not only on my parents' life, but in my life as well.
I love that. And I love how you mentioned the word giving, like giving. And I'd love to ask this question of, what are you giving? Like, what is your hope to give to the world, to your communities that you're wanting to continue to build up and empower?
Yeah, I created my consulting practice with the intent of leaving a legacy of having prepared the Latino-led nonprofit organizations, built a sustainable, robust fundraising department program that is diversified within individual giving, planned giving, annual giving, corporate giving, and grant giving, so that we don't become so dependable on government and foundation grants. As many people know, foundations and private foundations and grants really only give less than 2% of their revenue to, of their sources that they give out to organizations of basically of color. So why are we spending 90% of our time focusing on filling out so many grants that have so many strings attached and so dependable and so restricted fundings, when we as a Latino community can build a robust individual giving program and allow us to give us the opportunity to invest in our communities and help empower our communities and organizations for the people in our community that have been underserved. So
for someone who isn't in fundraising, maybe it's that leader or someone that wants to continue to grow into this field, you mentioned a lot of different ways that people could give: annual giving, planned giving, all of these different categories as a sense. Can you walk through all of the different ways that organizations can receive funds from individuals or companies? And then could you really break down what you're seeing in the landscape of which ones are most effective?
Yeah, definitely. Individual giving is donors like you and me, in us individually investing in organizations, and that can come in various ways. It can come in lifetime and with the life and the dead. And the dead would be a planned giving, which is really a gift, a deferred gift, or a gift by bequest, or a gift by will. It's kind of leaving part of your assets at the time of your demise. That's really what a planned giving is in a nutshell. 90% of gifts by planned giving are gifts of will. So and then when you come to corporations and foundations, those are really more that you go into a portal, you kind of talk about the mission and vision of the organization, you provide documents that support your financial status, which, whether it's the 990, which is an IRS tax form, you don't really need to know much about that, but there's requirements that you have to fill out to do these grants, and that becomes a hurdle for early beginning stages of a nonprofit that don't have the historical data and the financial data. So that's why I'm always kind of emphasizing on the individual giving. Not only can you give every day, and also the end of the year appeals, which are the envelopes that you get with the checks and the envelopes that you write at $25.50. Those what we call annual giving or direct marketing campaigns that are part of the individual giving. They're just maybe lower end donors, but at the end of the day, we're all really individual giving donors. So the main bucket is individual, corporate, foundations, and then of course events, and events are part of corporate sponsorships that you ask companies to sponsor the event.
Now, in your landscape, in your experience, that you've seen, if I'm building an organization from ground up, where should I focus? My perspective is maybe on the individual side to really build up your base and be able to create, those champions in a sense. But based upon all that you've seen and the money that you've raised and the organizations that you've led, where would an organization begin?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer of individual giving. The original investors, it's in the mainstream nonprofit world, most 67 to 75% of the fundraising revenue generating comes from individual giving, whether you're alive or dead. So that's whether it's an individual or a planned gift, a gift by will, as I mentioned before. And I think I always tell people, we as nonprofit organizations need to realize our organizations are we're entrepreneurs. This is a revenue generating machine. I realize it's a 501c3 and it's profit, but we need to get away from we're serving the poor, we're poor, we must remain, poor. And that drives me insane because we're not poor. I always say to them, do you think that the CEO of the American Red Cross or the United Way are poor people? No, they're not. And there's no shame to that. I think, part of our culture, kind of the humility and the shame of making money is very tied to our family heritage and background, and we need to it's okay for us to be able to make money. And as a 501c3, you're an entrepreneur, you have to generate revenue. I compare it very, very similar to people early in their professions when they're creating an app and they call for angel investors. Mm-hmm. And these are people that are we call the stakeholders that are investing in your organization. Why don't we do that with the 501c3 organizations and have your community, your closest member, friends and family and board members invest in a mission and vision that you all believe that it's going to empower and provide services to the underserved. And at the end, we all really win because we're creating a better society, a better community, and we're moving forward.
I love that because I think that a lot of organizations are so focused on grants and they're not building earned revenue strategies. They're not really maximize individual giving opportunities or corporate foundations, et cetera, et cetera. Why do you feel like organizations are so grant dependent in the first place?
I think in many ways it's easier in the sense, not so much of the process, but it's easier because you can, you submit portals. You don't have a face-to-face. So if you get rejected, you can kind of almost put it under the rug and no one really knows. On an individual giving basis, you're meeting with prospects, with donors, supporters, stakeholders, and you're putting your face to the organization and you're asking someone to support you. I always tell people we're not asking for money. We're asking for an investment, for support to join us in the journey, because that's really critical, especially in the Latino culture, where there's so much shame about asking for money. It seems like we're begging, or I think in Spanish, you're asking for una limosna. We're not asking for a limosna, we're begging. We're asking you to invest. So I think we do what we feel comfortable with, and it's a lot easier to sit behind your desk, do an application, get rejected, and be like, I did the best I could. Unlike then going out to people and really empowering people and teaching them about the impact that your organization does, and please join us in the journey to invest. So I think it's part of the fear of the rejection, part of the, it takes time, relationship building, fundraising on the individual giving is really, like I say to people, in many ways, you're courting the donors, kind of like in a personal relationship. And that takes time, patience, and it's a lot of effort. But at the tail end of the road, if you realize that 60 to 75% of your revenue generating comes from people like you and me, why are we not investing more effort on that and building the relationship? So
I love that. It's like, why are we spending so much time investing into these programs and portals? Just invest that time into the right people. I think that's so important. And, I'd love to know, what are some of the creative funding strategies? This traditional fundraising model and going to people and courting them and then being able to get them into invest or, donate or sponsor your specific cause. It's very traditional. Are you seeing some of innovative or creative funding strategies for these organizations to come together and be able to move their organization's needle forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that one of the things that's resonating a lot with my clients in the Latino community is kind of like the peer-to-peer fundraising, where you're kind of creating a group of ambassadors, of supporters that are going to their network. So, for example, you have 10 friends and you say to your friends, "Hey, I want you to raise for my organization. Can you raise $150 each?" And these 10 friends, and I said to them, and then ask 10 of your friends to raise another 150. And so when you see the cumulative effect of that, you can really raise millions and millions and at least thousands and thousands of dollars. And you're starting to create that kind of.
Hey, it's Kyle. Sorry to interrupt your programming, but I got a quick culture check for you. How's your team's energy right now? I mean, literally, right now. Are people feeling inspired? Or are they just showing up? See, here's the truth. Culture doesn't change because we talk about it. It changes because we live it actively every single day. And that's what I help organizations do. Build contagious cultures that people actually want to be a part of. Through keynote talks, interactive trainings, and hands-on consulting, I help leaders transform the way their teams connect, perform, and grow. So if your culture needs a little bit of spark, let's light it up together. Visit theculturelab.org, again, theculturelab.org, or connect with me directly on LinkedIn at Kyle S. King to learn more about how we can work together. Because remember, your culture is contagious. Make it worth catching. Now let's get back to the program.
Familia to the donor base, you're kind of creating what we'd call your portfolio of supporters. And then, and I think that resonates better with our communities because it's community based, it's community fundraising, it's peer to peer, and we feel more comfortable when we, invest in doing those kind of issues. I mean, I compared it very similar to how many Latino families have raised money for a quinceañera for their cousin or tia or sister, because those are things that are important to us. Or, I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and you see a lot of that peer-to-peer fundraising in moments of despair when we've had a lot of people from Central and South America that pass away in D.C. and their families want to send their body back to the country so that they can have a proper burial in their country. And we do fundraising to take them body. So it's something that we're already doing. It's almost similar to the giving that we do at church every Sunday that everybody puts in the basket. Why are we not doing that within our communities? And that seems to be resonating and not as threatening as to going to traditional mainstream kind of prospecting a donor, taking them out, having coffee, and then making the ask.
What are some of the things like that executive directors are overlooking, or maybe they misunderstand about really that intersection or that process between really building and nurturing that relationship for that to even be able to happen?
I think a lot of I would say that most of the executive directors sometimes that I worked have lacked the experience of fundraising. They've been really strong program directors, or they've been involved with the fight, with the cause, and have never really maybe had put stepped into the space of asking people for money, doing the fundraising. And I feel executive directors need to understand the importance of what it takes to be able to raise funds. I'm a member of a Somos El Poder, which is a Latinx fundraising institute. And one of our things that differentiates us from the traditional association of fundraising professionals is that we bring into our conferences and to our training the executive director, the chairman of the board, and the development director. And we teach them the synergy and the relationship and the role that all three of them play in the fundraising aspect. And I think a lot of executive directors, they're so busy with creating and the policy and the mission that they forget that you need to generate revenue to be able to pay not only your salary but the salary of the staff that are doing the work that you're providing services for.
And you mentioned boards earlier in your answer. Can we talk about the importance of boards and some of the misconception of boards are essentially just here to govern? Like, they are also revenue generating parties as well that should be going out there and being culture carriers for the mission. Can you talk about that as well?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's interesting. It's very timely because I just published an article on LinkedIn about the passion and the mission for board governance. And, I think a lot of board members join a board and they think that they're just a volunteer and they don't realize that they have legal responsibilities, fiduciary. Often I think we fall into the rush of filling in the seats with friends and people we know, but we really truly miss the opportunity to truly equip the board members and tell them the knowledge and their duty to care, the duty for the duty to be loyal, the duty for obedience. That's part of the legal aspects of a board, and that they have a duty and responsibility to the organization, the fiduciary duty to help in the fundraising. That they should be getting or connecting us with people that can do the fundraising. If you sit on a board and you're not providing any of those services, I always tell people, then you should sit on an advisory committee and help give advice. But we don't need the advice. We really need the manpower to help us identify people who are willing to invest in our organizations.
I love that. One of the things in your work in our initial conversations is that, passion is great. Passion is important. Passion is wonderful within organizations and people that really believe. But you've made it very clear that passion without systems is dangerous. Like, what are some of the systems that matter most or even matter first in building an organization that is sustainable?
I think really looking and analyzing of the people that are supporting within whether it's your volunteers, your board members, even your staff. I've worked in organizations that I hold as the program directors, who are for the most part social workers, that you're part of the fundraising relationship because you're the one providing the services in the program, and I need your information to be able to talk to our donors and prospects, whether it's on the individual giving person or whether it's on a corporate or foundation or sponsorship. But I think I'm a firm believer of having to sit down with everybody and kind of giving them a map road of the expectations of the duty to care, the duty to loyalty, the duty to obedience, their fiduciary duty. I think the personal philanthropy, every board member of a nonprofit should contribute from their own resources. Making a meaningful and personal donation allows them to lead by example. I always say, if you don't have skin in the game, how can I ask for someone to give when you're not getting? And then also kind of connecting us beyond their own wallets. They should be able to be strong advocates of the mission and commit to opening doors to help us build the most robust. So I think when you're starting an organization, I think you have to have those conversations, because sometimes we start providing the services and we forget. It's kind of like the chicken and the egg, which one comes first? And I think the fundraising part of it is a pivotal, most important thing of creating a sustainable, healthy nonprofit organization.
What's one of the and I love to ask this question, just gain different people's perspectives. Like, what is one fundraising truth that probably makes people feel uncomfortable but needs to be said out loud?
That if you don't ask, you don't get. And and also that you're, by not asking someone, you're depriving them of the joy of giving. It's been proven that most people who are donors, who give, live a happier, healthier, longer life. So you shouldn't be depriving me from giving me part of my joy in writing a check to you. So, and I think the fear of rejection you should overcome that and realize you're not allowing them to have the opportunity. And also, people don't give because they don't ask. In Spanish, they say, if el que no chilla no come. If the baby doesn't cry, he's not going to be fed. And so, it's just as simple as asking, what are you thinking? Or what role do you see in this organization? How do you want to support us? I mean, it's just basic conversations without having to say, can you give me money? Because that's not what we're asking them to do.
What are some of the questions that executive directors and leaders of organizations can be asking themselves and reflecting on, so that they can be able to show up in this space a little bit better and a little bit more confidently as well?
Yeah, I think doing a lot of self-reflection as to the role that they play. I mean, I always feel that the executive directors are in many ways kind of like the chief development officer, even though they might have a chief development officer, but they're kind of like the big ambassadors. Is kind of like you're the leader. When people think about the United Way, they think about the executive director. When you think about the Urban League or the double ACP, you immediately think of certain people that are in those roles. And so you're like the captain of the ship. And so you should really kind of be aware of, how can I build this community of funders, volunteers, and supporters and ambassadors to build a robust organization that's also providing support and services to my staff and lead by example. So I think, by reflecting on that, I think you would be a much better leader.
I love that. Because this Before we can advance, I believe there's a reflection, there's an introspection that needs to happen so that we can really be able to see the full landscape of everything that's really going on. I'd love to know, like, why this work? Like, what keeps your fire burning? With your background, you could do a lot of different things. Like, why this work and why now?
I mean, I think it's my call. I feel a strong sense of faith that I have the skills that I help empower people fundraise. I just came off from a 2-day full conference from Somos el Poder Fundraising con Ganas, and to see 100 Latino-led organizations and leaders and board members, kind of us giving them the tools and the resources to fundraise, and you see these faces light up, have an aha moment, feel empowered. I'm all about, I'm not so much about the revolution, but I'm about the movement. And that sense of me giving people that power is just, it just fills my soul. It's what keeps me going, to know that I was able to pass on a skill that I had been blessed to have to people that can use it and build and become better, meaner, leaner, and greener, and kind of build their organizations. There's nothing better than to hear someone who I've trained or have coached, or I'm doing my consulting practice, that said, we were able to raise X amount of money more because of this idea that you gave us, or because of the encouragement. And for me, I'm making this piece of the world of my life a little bit better. And I always feel like at the time of me no longer being on this earth, I want to be remembered, but what I did, not what I gave.
That's good. What I did, not just what I gave. I love that. 3 to 5 years from now, what would you have wanted to do that would allow people to really remember you?
Ideally, having Latino-led organizations, or honestly, any nonprofit organization, kind of having a really build their individual giving, going from, we only had 5% of our revenue came from individual giving. Now we have 30-40%, and the momentum is growing and bigging. And that was all because I kind of planted the seed that they watered, that they cultivated, that they nurtured, and built a robust system. And also the other kind of thing that I would want to leave behind is that we should be talking about planned giving. We're getting into the youngest person of the baby boomer generation will be 62 years this year. Between now and 2045, it's what we call the greatest transfer of wealth in the generation of our history. We're going to be, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to be passing on from baby boomers generations to the next generations and nonprofits over $70 trillion worth of wealth going to organizations. So if we're not creating these planned giving programs, whether it's a retirement, an IRA required minimum distribution, on your website, or a planned gift, or a bequest, or a gift of stock, or maybe getting more familiarized with what is a donor advised funds. Why is this important in our community? We do have people in our community that are ripe to be giving those kind of gifts. So between the individual giving and the planned giving, I feel the impact could be really reflective on the efforts that they make, and visible.
For the leader listening in right now that is full of passion, is feeling overwhelmed like most leaders, that is underfunded, that is really unsure about the next step, what would you want them to hear from you directly right now?
First of all, I would tell them to pause and breathe, because this too shall pass. And just kind of create a community of supporters. Think about your top 10 friends, top 20 friends that you can really have a really honest conversation and explain to them the dire straits that we are in a community. I just had, honestly, an attendee at this conference said, they're in the Midwest, they're really struggling through funding. And I said, I want you to write an email coming from your heart, talking about what's at risk. If we don't get these supporters, this organization will dissolve, and the impact could be detrimental to the community, because this is an organization that provides exercises, mental health, sustainability, and we need that in our communities more now than ever. So I think just kind of reflect and focus on what really matters, and don't get overwhelmed by the minutia of everything and all the outside noise that's happening. We just need to play a better game of chess than other people, and be strategic on what our moves are when it comes to moving organizations forward.
Now, when you think about the game chess, which is my absolute favorite game in my life, outside of, I like Taboo as well because I like acting different things out. How are you helping organizations play chess? Like, what is the work that you're doing in your consulting practice to really help these organizations be able to go from where they are to where you desire for them to be?
Yeah, absolutely. I start from the basic 101. What's working, what's not working. Let's look at your donor database. Let's look, do you have a systems? Do you have a CRM? What kind of cycle do you have? Where are you generating most of your revenue? What's working, what's not working? Let's talk about the mission and vision. Is the message, is your storytelling, really resonating with people? And kind of just looking at that, because I think a lot of organizations, I feel like there's a lot of spaghetti thrown against the wall and see what sticks, because they're so desperate to raise money. And in the desperation of trying to raise money, they forget to pause and breathe and really analyze, what are we doing that it's not working, and how can we fix it, or how can we move the needle forward? And we can do that by baby steps. Fundraising is a skill that needs nurturing and giving and in repetitiveness. And I think sometimes when you even talk to donors and you're like, well, at what stage is your donor base in? And they're like, what do you mean donor base? I'm like, are they in the identification stage, or the cultivation, or the solicitation, or the stewardship? And kind of really teaching them about the different life cycles of a donor, and making sure that within each life phase that they are being attended the way they should. And I think when you start kind of breaking it into more kind of attainable, kind of let's do it kind of thing, I think it becomes, I've seen the difference. I consulted with an organization that didn't have an individual giving. We started in August. They raised a couple $1,000s, which in the big picture, you don't think that it's a lot, but considering that they raised $0 last year and they're starting to create their donor database, it's critical. And they're also not only they're doing that, but they're also learning, oh, there's such a thing as identifying the donor. Oh, there's a such thing as cultivating or qualifying the donor. Oh, this is the cultivation. The cultivation is, like I always tell people, it's the courting aspect. It's when you go out with your date a couple times and you're going out and you're getting to know each other. What what you don't like. How can we build a better relationship? And when the moment that you kind of want to ask the person to marry you, that's a solicitation for me. And then after you seal the deal, you have to keep the fire burning in the relationship, or whether it's, a personal, romantic relationship or a friendship relationship. Friendships, you need to, build the trust and the relationship and the life experiences. So that's what they're kind of doing with donors. And I think in fundraising, people just think about the transactional, having people write you a check. And that's not what fundraising is all about.
I really appreciate how you even use that example, because when you get married, that's the beginning. It's not the end. It's not we get married and we went through this whole dating and courting and actual ceremony, and then it's like, all right, we did it. No, the real work begins. And for someone listening in, the real work begins with your donor once they show up, once they give, once they, join your committee or do these different things. That's where the relationship really begins, so that we can turn first these strangers into taking them through this journey to becoming your champions. This is such an exciting and amazing conversation. So rich. Where can people find you? How can they connect with you online?
Yeah, so they can go to my website, which is pjrconsultingllc.com, or at Pedro Jose Rivera Esquire on LinkedIn. You can find me there as well.
I love this. What is your word of encouragement, your word of wisdom, or just that one thing that you want to leave listeners with that want to continue to push this mission and push their needles forward in their communities?
Resilience is our strength.
Tell me more.
When I think about our ancestors, Latino people, Latino communities, we come from we do come from indigenous cultures. We had our ancestors build fire out of sticks, build, knives and things out of stone, build temples, build empires, build fortresses. And if we were able to do that with really no tools, and at those times, we have the skills. We are a survival, resilient, strong culture that this too shall pass. So I'm always like, resilience is our strength. Let's move forward. I'm like very palante. This too shall pass. And we have to be more strategic and intentional as we navigate through the challenging times that this country is going through.
I'm so thankful of you, my friend. You communicated the necessary things in this conversation. So filled with wisdom, so filled with energy, but then providing listeners a system that they can be able to use. I'm so excited. I'm so excited to continue to build this relationship with you and continue to build with you as you continue to build organizations that are building and equipping our communities. If you're still listening in, follow Pedro on all of his channels. Work with him, reach out and have an actual conversation. He actually responds on LinkedIn. He's a real person, not a bot. And if this is your first time listening into the Contagious Culture Podcast, we want you to review, share, and subscribe to our channel. For our listeners, we always end with this one question. What type of culture are you spreading? The energy you bring is the culture you create. Go make yours worth catching. It's another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks for tuning in to the Contagious Culture Podcast. If this episode challenged or inspired you, hey, take a second to share it with someone who's building culture in their world. Make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps more leaders, educators, and change makers just like yourself join the movement. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or YouTube at Kyle S. King for more tips, tools, and methodologies to be able to help you create this ecosystem of absolute excellence. Until next time, lead boldly, live intentionally, and remember, your culture is contagious. Make it worth catching.